Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome along to the June edition of the Landlord Lens. This is the ongoing collaboration between Property Tribes, of which I'm the co-founder and also a landlord of some 18 years now, and the NRLA. And joining me throughout is Ben Beale, who is the CEO of the NRLA. And Ben and I came up with this format, I guess, last autumn. And we wanted to really highlight the topics that have really engaged landlords over the past couple of weeks or so of each edition. And we do that by looking at the trending topics silo on Property Tribes. And, you know, if you're familiar with social media, you'll very often see things trending, whether it be Twitter or Instagram or other social media sites. And we actually have the same on Property Tribes, where we have a little algorithm that works in the background, looking at who's looking the most at different topics, the most replies that are coming in, the most level of engagement. And this silo updates about every 3 hours or so. So it's a really interesting barometer of what has got landlords engaged. So Ben, great to see you again. And we're starting on a really just general trending topic that's been occurring across the forums. Very positive, actually, and that is both the sales and the rental market absolutely going through the roof now that restrictions have started to be eased. So good news to start with.
Absolutely, it's always good to start on a positive. Vanessa, hopefully we're finished on a positive as well. But yeah, it really, really good, and it's the sort of buoyant market that we all want to see. It reinforces that housing is really, really important to the economy, and at a really simple level, it kind of feels that things are getting back to how they once were. It feels like it's been a long wait, but the sun's arrived, the market's buoyant. Great, a good start to June.
Indeed, and we've heard lots of stories on Property Tribes of people having mass viewings, lots of offers for property for both sale and rental. And 6 months ago, I don't think we could have imagined this. We were very concerned about a cliff edge for the stamp duty. Thankfully, that has been put onto a tapering basis now, which I think has helped a lot. But I don't think anybody could have predicted, after what we've been through for the last year, that the market would have literally come out of the traps and gone on fire, which is definitely what's happening.
No, that's right, and I think it's people are spurred on, aren't they, by perhaps their living experience in lockdown, and perhaps has made them think differently about the type of accommodation that they are living in, and similarly for investors as well, availing of stamp duty holiday. I think it's certainly, I think it's got some way to to play out, to see whether there are any long-term lessons that stick with us from the COVID experience, but certainly those people that have been locked out of moving or unable to move are now availing of it. And obviously, that's really, really good news for landlords and agents, well, everybody really, because we know that the housing market, when it's functioning properly, makes such a wider contribution to society in a way that I think a lot of people overlook. The housing sector is so important to the economy of this country, and as I say, at a personal level, it's feeling like that light at the end of the tunnel is now quite a big light. The remaining question is obviously what happens in a couple of weeks' time, and whether we can all go away on holiday. But I fear for that date. But housing for the moment is good, which is great.
Yes, and that light at the end of the tunnel is not a train coming down the tracks. Thankfully, it's genuine light at the end of the tunnel. Just quickly, Ben, just talking about changing tenant priorities. There has been a lot in the media about this, and also on Property Tribes. And there are three key elements that are influencing tenant moves. Number one is outdoor space or proximity to outdoor space. Number two is a home, somewhere to have a home office, somewhere separated away from the rest of the property where somebody can work and concentrate, in a peaceful environment. And third, super fast broadband. So landlords thinking about making acquisitions post-COVID, they need to take these kind of issues on board, don't they, with their property selection?
I think there's a lot to learn in the short term for the longer term. I think that is going to stick with us, and I think those landlords that are easily able to adapt to those requirements, if they're investing, will take those three things, but also they will be very cognizant of perhaps considering slightly different areas. I know we're going to come on to sort of north and south later on, but the traditional place that you may have bought to rent out may well end up being quite different. My mother has bought some houses during lockdown, and if she bought them a couple of years ago, I would have said that she was barking mad and nobody would be interested in the middle of bloody nowhere. But actually, fantastic gardens, big room sizes, a little space for an outside office in the garden, and they've gone absolutely like hotcakes for the asking price and more. So yeah, I think obviously for some landlords who have got maybe central London or in the city conurbation locations, then they may well see some rent challenges and the like as the market adjusts. But I think it's really giving some interesting buying decisions for people, and those are the things that people are looking at. And I think I alluded to the 21st of June and whether the work from home guidance would continue. Whether it does or not, I think working from home is here for the long term, and more people are going to be working from home at least a couple of days a week, because I think businesses will just struggle to get everybody back. And obviously the NRLA, we have advice line, we've got training, we've got a whole range of things, all done from the comfort of bedrooms across the United Kingdom. And you know what? It works really, really well. And a lot of my colleagues will be saying to me, well, I'd quite like to save some money and not have to catch the bus, train, or park up or whatever, and only come to the office when it's necessary. So it gives businesses as well a huge conundrum as to how best to bring people back, which will of course impact the local housing market and by default the purchasing decisions of landlords.
Indeed, and we're actually starting to see in the media a slight reversal of this trend that was developing of people moving out of city centres. A lot of younger people moved home to their parents, and I did have to smile, Ben. There was an article saying that a young man was suffering from FOMO, and that's why he had
fear of missing out.
So, FOMO is starting to influence tenants apparently. But talking of the London market, I've actually had a void myself at a one-bed flat in it's located between Holloway Road and Highbury and Islington Tube Station in N5, and I have taken that opportunity to do a complete refurbishment of the flat. It did need it, in all honesty, but I think we need to take these opportunities when we have them to upgrade our properties, and that's a topic we're going to actually come on to shortly. But our first topic is very appropriate because we've got this glorious sunshine today, and it's a lady came onto Property Tribes and asked the tribe to help her decide whether she should buy a holiday let or another standard buy to let. And she'd seen a little holiday apartment in Penzance in Cornwall, and she was very, very tempted to go for that. Now, I think this is an interesting topic, Ben, because when I started out, I decided that the safest route forwards, and I am a kind of low risk investor, is to start with just standard single occupancy 3 and 4 bed family homes, and build a solid net cash flowing portfolio first before branching out and investing in higher risk strategies. And there's that old saying, higher risk, higher reward. When you're starting out learning to climb a mountain, you don't go and climb Mount Everest to start with. You start on, you know, a small hill and work your way up, and you don't learn to drive in a Ferrari, because if you did, you'd probably crash. So there's a lot to be said for starting out in low risk environments before branching out into other strategies. So I was just curious, Ben, when you, I know you've got HMOs now, but did you start out just with single occupancy buy-to-let first?
I did. I started with a 1-bed flat and a studio because the demand at the time was pretty strong for those types of properties, and also you know, I don't think you can go too far wrong with that approach, and it served me well. I then, as you know, moved into HMOs, which are more hands-on. That said, I don't find HMOs. I'm going to touch some wood now because someone's going to ring me with a problem. And invariably, the problem with HMOs is people locking themselves out or forgetting where their keys are or whatever.
So you need digital keys then, digital access.
Do you know what? I absolutely do. And it's on, you know, I know we're going to talk about refurbishments, but that's one of the things I want to do, because I'm sick and tired of you know, having to go round and let people back in. And I need to have a more digitalized solution to keys, because they're a bloody nightmare, frankly. But I don't find HMOs that difficult to manage. The difficulty, I guess, perhaps comes with the bells and whistles that come, or the hoops you have to jump through is probably a better analogy, in terms of Article 4 that you might have to consider if you've got, you know, you might need planning permission to convert from residential into a HMO. And I think the other things are around the compliance elements, which, although on paper look onerous, are actually fine, I think. You know, my big bugbear is around the role that licensing plays to hold all of that together, which, as you know, Vanessa, I'm not a massive fan of. But you know, that will be something that people need to get their heads around. But I think starting simpler and working up is, it's not everyone's strategy, but it was my sort of strategy. I have ummed and ahed about holiday lets, maybe or mostly rather from the point of view of tax changes making it more attractive. If you've got a furnished holiday let, you can offset your mortgage interest like the good old days. If you haven't, then you get shafted like everybody else. So there is an attraction there to me to want to do that. But holiday lets, I don't know that I have the time to be able to manage that sort of thing, and it's something that I haven't ventured into. But I know it's, you know, it's something that I think you guys look at.
Yeah, we've got 2 South Coast holiday lets. We got them in 2008 and 2009, and you know, they're doing extremely well. I mean, we are, I think, entering a golden era of you know, the staycation, the holiday at home, with all the flight restrictions and all the other you know, issues going on around COVID. It's looking increasingly attractive to holiday at home, and when the weather is like it is today, I don't think you can beat the British seaside. It's got so much going for it, you know, and you pack everything up in your car, go straight to your holiday cottage, and then you're there for your week or your 2 weeks or however long. There's no, you know, airport queues to go through, and issues with luggage and dealing with fractious children if you have them in tow. So that there is a lot to be said for it. This particular lady had a few single occupancy buy-to-lets, and she'd seen this Cornish holiday apartment, I think it was, and she was going to buy it unencumbered without a mortgage. And I think on that basis, you know, it was pretty much a no-brainer, because we've heard of, you know, the Cornish property market going absolutely, you know, through the roof. Lots of people looking for second homes at the moment, and that's really going to force the appreciation on holiday type properties. So very interesting times to think about getting involved in holiday lets. And my main piece of advice would be to work with a good management company that can undertake all of the changeover and laundry tasks for you, because you do need extremely high quality cleanliness in a holiday let, and you have to have really good cleaners. And one of the issues that crops up time and time again is that people struggle to get good quality, consistent cleaners to work on their holiday lets. So there's a lot to be said, but like any strategy, there's pros and cons, and there's the pitfalls, and you really do need to educate yourself before you embark on it.
Yeah, I agree with that, Vanessa. And I think, some of the things that may tempt landlords into holiday lets are obviously around the financial element if you've got a mortgage, but also, I've rented Airbnb places. They work really well for me. They have a lot of churn, and obviously you need to weigh the cost of that churn against a more consistent income. But it could have advantages, and you don't have to, touch wood, generally worry about things that you have to worry about in the private rented sector. And I'm thinking things like notice periods, eviction bans, and all of that sort of stuff. So it's and as I say, now I think those people that do have holiday lets or are thinking about holiday lets, depending on what's announced on the 21st of June and whether there's any other restrictions on going abroad, I think the good old British seaside is going to be attractive. If you've got a property that's on the coast, it'd be like having a place at Wimbledon, isn't it? And renting it out for a couple of weeks for Wimbledon fortnight. You can make a killing, and I suspect the same will be true this year. From the point of view of sustainable renting, though, I still find it really, really bizarre that the private rented sector, which is, whether you like it or not, an average tenure of 4.5 years per tenancy, sustainable, versus the sort of Airbnb holiday lets is treated less favourably. Beyond me.
No, I agree. Okay, so our next topic, which we're going to move on to now, is the importance of undertaking due diligence. And the thread on Property Tribes that I posted a few days ago has got a lot of traction because I used a pictorial illustration of due diligence. And what it was doing the rounds on Facebook, actually. It was some images of young people hanging off a rock, and the images looked like they were literally hanging in space, thousands of feet above a really beautiful coastal kind of vista in the background. But when you actually saw where they were and you took a wider perspective picture, the rock was actually only about 4 feet off the ground, and they were hanging underneath it. But the way the photograph was framed, it looked like they were literally hanging in space. And I thought that was such a great analogy for, understanding the bigger picture, seeing the bigger picture, having the right perspective on something. Because in property, there are numerous different commercial transactions. And it could be, referencing a tenant, it could be doing due diligence on a property acquisition, it could be doing due diligence on a letting agent. These are all people or entities that you're going to have commercial transactions with. You do need to do intense due diligence on them. And Ben, I think that's a message that will be, evergreen, and perhaps even more so post-COVID, where we know that many of the risks have been amplified.
Yeah, exactly right. Due diligence has never been more important. I think landlords that have been burnt by the stay-on repossessions will know that only too well. And one of the other stories of this week, Vanessa, linked to the due diligence that landlords do is the role that advance rent can play in mitigating against bad credit, etc. And I was on 5 Live earlier this week and a couple of other radio shows responding to what Generation Rent was saying about it being unfair that landlords were requesting 6 months advance rent, well, you know, what do you want? You know, if you've got dodgy credit, or you've got, or worse, you've got a history of not paying your bills, well, that tells you a story, doesn't it? It tells you, and when we think about it from a due diligence perspective, it's an orange/red flag to the landlord that says this person hasn't met their obligations previously. Doesn't mean you can't take them, but you know, with any type of credit, you know, we should be asking questions about that. So I don't agree with that stance that somehow asking for 6 months rent is problematic. Landlords will only do that if there is an issue. They will probably only do that having explored the guarantor option, because that, you know, that's fine for me if someone has got bad credit, and often works quite well. But to somehow say that that taking rent in advance is, you know, an abuse of power or whatever, you know, I just don't see it. They're the terms, you know, take it or leave it, frankly. And I think that this is going to be a big, and it should be a big issue for landlords, because, you know, with everything that we've been through, and, you know, frankly continue to go through, you know, if you are presented with a tenant that is has been affected by or works in a business by has a job that is in an industry that's been badly affected by COVID, if I can get my teeth in, then you ought to be raising fairly significant questions. And you should be raising those questions, because if there is another eviction ban in a way that we have seen, unfortunately, go on for as long as it has, then that puts you in a really, really difficult position. And if you add to that, I'll get back off my soapbox at the moment, but if you add to that no financial support to help you sustain or maintain that tenancy or deal with that problem, then I'm afraid you'll be having a no-nonsense attitude to risk and referencing. And I say, that's quite right. There's nothing wrong with advance rent. It's not against the law. It doesn't constitute a fee. It doesn't constitute a deposit, providing you've worked it into the tenancy agreement correctly. Perfectly legitimate, in my view.
Well, there's another instance as well, which has also cropped up on property tribes in recent times, and that is if you get, we've had a lot of Japanese tenants coming to the UK, apparently, because there's a lot of questions about letting to them. They don't come with a credit history or rental history in the UK. So that would be another instance where it would be completely legitimate to perhaps ask for, you know, rent in advance. I think the other thing I would say on this topic, Ben, is that, you know, we do have access to tools such as open banking now. And this is very, very powerful in terms of tenant referencing. And Property Tribes works with, is partnered with a company called Cubic Lease, who do tenant referencing. I know you've got your own suppliers as well, but essentially there are referencing companies out there that now access open banking. And why this is so powerful is it shows an exact snapshot of the tenant's financial position today on the 3rd of June at 14:28 p.m. And this is really powerful when we've got tenants that, you know, maybe have lost their jobs, been on furlough, or, you know, there's all sorts of different things in the mix now affecting tenants' ability to pay rent. And I think the use of digital tools like open banking is, again, another way to mitigate landlord risk.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think, you know, as investors and, you know, people that rely on due diligence, the more tools we have at our disposal, you know, to protect our assets and to protect our investment, you know, it seems to me to be a bit of a no-brainer, really, particularly in the industry that we are in. And it's interesting, Vanessa, that I didn't mention this to you beforehand, but you mentioned about you know, people coming from Hong Kong because of the you know, the decisions that have been made in respect of that. I received a letter at the back end of last week from the Secretary of State highlighting that these people may not, or will, unlikely that they would have credit ratings that could be traced, but inviting landlords to exercise discretion and to maybe take a view, which actually I think a lot of landlords already do. You know, not having any credit is not necessarily a barrier to accessing one of my properties, but you know, making sure that you make your case in terms of employment and generally being, you know, good to repay the rent will be an important factor. But it's you know, it's funny after, you know, everything that we've been through and continue to go through, because it's only 3 days that the eviction ban has lifted, and actually it hasn't actually lifted because you need to serve a 14-day notice period notice on the court to request them to reactivate and crack on with it. You know, it's funny that you know, landlords are being, you know, leaned on to exercise discretion and the like, which I find, you know, a very mixed message.
Yeah, well, it's talking of the Hong Kongers. There is this visa program in place, which is encouraging Hong Kongers to come to the UK and purchase property. I believe something like 46,000 have applied for this visa to date, but a lot of them are coming to the UK and are unable to buy something straight away and want to find their feet in the UK, so they're choosing to rent first. So yeah, it's not benefiting the sales market to have this foreign investment, but also it's interesting that it's had a positive knock-on effect to the rental market as well. So there's another positive.
Indeed.
You mentioned the ending of the eviction ban on the 1st of June. Now, this was interesting. You know, on Landlord Lens, we're always talking about trending topics, the topics that have engaged landlords. The eviction ban ending, damp squib.
Yeah.
I posted it on the 1st of June, didn't get one single comment. Now, I'm struggling to think why that is, Ben. You and I often talk about what we call landlord inertia or landlord apathy, and that does not apply to the lovely people on this call, because we know that you guys are the ones that are engaged, that are interested in learning and want to know stuff. So this does not apply to you at all. But there are a certain quarter of landlords that don't engage with landlord topics really at all. They're probably busy in their life as a vet or a teacher or you know, a solicitor, or they're running their business, and they don't really think of themselves as a landlord. And this is the kind of demographic of landlord that we struggle to reach and support and create awareness for, because they're just not wearing a landlord hat. And it was interesting, though, that we didn't get any bites on the eviction ban ending, because, of course, when it was brought in, there was absolute uproar. And landlords were really furious about it. But now maybe they've just been diverted by the sunny weather and the bank holiday. I don't know.
I don't blame them, to be honest with you. Pims in the garden is far more exciting than talking about the eviction ban. But no, you're right. There was, you know, absolute fury when it was brought in, even if people understood why it was brought in. I can only take from that, you know, let's. If we look at the figures, and we've done a lot of research on this because we've wanted to obviously get back to relative normality, and we're not quite there yet, but this is an important step as the sector reopens, particularly for those landlords who have got debts with nothing to do with COVID and have just had 14 months added to it. You know, there will be a small cohort of people that will be really, really pleased by this news. But it does reinforce the view, actually, that the vast majority of tenants have paid their rent. The vast majority of landlords have done what is expected of them and have behaved properly. And again, you know, we've got a small number of people around the edges who don't fall into that category and have been badly burnt by the eviction ban. So I can only assume that a lot of the listeners and readers haven't been impacted by the eviction ban. But of course, it's worth remembering that this only applies to England. Wales haven't made up their mind yet. And it's also worthwhile pointing out, and I feel that I need to, but the reduced notice periods is again a step in the right direction, as well as a commitment to returning to pre-pandemic notice periods from the 1st of October. That is good news. We've been pushing very, very heavily on the housing minister to do that, and you've hopefully seen a number of comments about that landlords are very vulnerable and susceptible to rent arrears. Those are quotes from our briefings to ministers, and it's a good opportunity. Well, we are, it's a slightly hollow victory, because obviously we don't really want people to be evicted if we can avoid it, but at the same time there are people and landlords out there that are carrying very, very significant debts, again, some of them with nothing to do with COVID, that have been waiting since February, March last year to be able to enforce that notice. You can't tell me that doesn't cause significant hardship. That this will come as very, very good news to those people. But I am surprised, Vanessa, that the reopening did not attract as much attention as the closure of the implementation of the eviction ban. But I'm also surprised that the government feel it's appropriate to simply reopen things without providing additional support to people, because the one thing that we do know, and back to the due diligence reports, is that the level of debt that's existing in the private rented sector is now threefold what it was pre-pandemic, and that is a marked difference between those that are in social housing that have reverted to pre-pandemic levels, but also to mortgage arrears, which have also reverted to pre-pandemic levels. There is a problem here, and what I want to make sure doesn't happen is that landlords come out as being the bogeyman in this. Horrible landlord, evicts poor family for not paying their rent. If we're talking about affordability and if we're talking about rent arrears, the problem is solvable, and the problem is solvable for a fraction of the cost of the stamp duty concession that's been given, and a fraction of the cost of the eat out to help out. And it's really interesting that there is widespread support for a tenant saver loan across organisations that you wouldn't ordinarily think that the NRLA would align themselves with. We're absolutely at one on this very narrow issue, that the best way to support those that have been really affected by the pandemic, and notwithstanding the financial support that the government have put out there, it just isn't enough. And the private rented sector is carrying, as I say, 3 times the amount of debt that it does usually. And I would have thought that as you open things up, you might have a scheme for people that are genuinely wanting to sustain their tenancy, to avail of some government support through a loan scheme to help both the landlord and the renter. And again, it's just one of those things that not every tenancy would be saved. I would totally get that. Those won't pay tenants would not benefit from that. They wouldn't avail of it. But the can't pay, they're exactly the type of people that I would have thought the government would want to protect. And actually, if the landlord probably doesn't want to evict them, they just are in a desperate state themselves that they are having to. And as I say, I think it's a real missed opportunity, because as we've said, and back to the due diligence point, this is going to impact credit scores for the long term. It will preclude some people from accessing a private rented sector property for upwards of 5 years. It will cause local authorities to be very, very stretched. It will cause additional spending in temporary accommodation. It will probably contribute towards increased homelessness figures that the government will have to pay extra money for to support in any event. So rather than seeing how bad it gets, as I know the strategy appears to do on a number of subjects, I would have thought that, you know, a simple loan scheme backed by the government for people that are serious about sustaining their home would be a good way to go, but clearly not. And it's something we have to be aware of as investors in the future around the importance of credit checks and the like. But I do think a trick has been missed here.
No, I'm inclined to agree with you on that front. We should also just point out that the government has published all the updated notice periods, etc., on the government website. So you do need to familiarise yourself with those. They are now available.
It's like Trivial Pursuit, I'm afraid. It's quite complicated.
Yes, it is. It is indeed. Okay, let's move on to our next topic. This was a landlord sharing how to, a kind of Rightmove hack of how to use Rightmove to source properties for refurbishment. And, you know, I used to be a Rightmove-aholic when I was in my kind of portfolio building phase. I still do go and have a look from time to time because I'm kind of semi in the market for another holiday cottage, and so I'm always kind of browsing around, looking at places where I could maybe set up another holiday let. So it is interesting that this wasn't a commonly known way to use Rightmove, but also I think it's a nice kind of link to the fact that you know, the buy, refurbish, refinance strategy. To my mind, it's always been a very strong strategy, no matter what the market conditions, because you are forcing the appreciation through refurbishment. But in the kind of market that we're in at the moment, that is literally breaking records, you're actually benefiting from you know, your organic capital appreciation as well. So it's rather a cherry on the top to be undertaking this strategy, adding value to property through refurbishment, creating a really good quality home ready for tenants to move into, refinancing your cash and going again. So I think it could be a kind of golden era of the so-called BRRR.
It could be another acronym that we need to get used to and add to our dictionary of acronyms in the housing sector. But yeah, I think you're right, Vanessa. I, like you, are a Rightmove stalker. When I have nothing better to do, rather than read a book, I'll have a look on Rightmove. But enough about my sad existence. Yeah, I mean, I do.
Inspiring.
It's true. I find it fascinating, and obviously the good thing is that, you know, a lot of agents now, you know, will do virtual viewings and sort of virtual tours that you can see far more, and you know, don't have to go and view and end up being a bit of a waster. So no, I think it's been really good from that perspective. But I mean, again, it's another interesting strategy, and I would just sort of, you know, add that it's what investors do really well that nobody gives them credit for, I guess, is, you know, taking a property that needs upgrading, refurbishing, improving it, and, you know, and doing just that, maybe flipping it, maybe making it available for rent. But you know, landlords do that very well, and it just shows what an agile marketplace that we have, that people are able to do that. I mean, I you know, given the prices being as they are at the moment, I'm wondering if the return is as generous as it once was, and it will be interesting to see what you know, what impact the stamp duty tapering has on any pent-up demand that we're experiencing at the moment. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting strategy, that's for sure.
Well, yes, and you know, just trying to find a property that, you know, typically you would want to buy slightly below market value to make it even more effective. It's very challenging to find those kind of properties. You know, these, as we started out with this call, you know, the market is on fire. Properties are selling like hot cakes. You know, there's mass viewings, offers on, you know, within 24 hours of the property going live onto the portals. So it is a challenge to find those properties that would work for that particular strategy. And then I think that's really where kind of education comes in, learning different ways of sourcing deals and different channels of sourcing deals, because you don't obviously just have to look on the portals. There are many other channels for sourcing deals. In fact, we did a whole week about discovering deals and how to find them, and the different channels you can use, such as auction, such as off market, and other such areas of deal sourcing. So it is interesting. I mean, certainly there was also a press release, I think it was by Paragon, a week or so ago, saying that landlords have been spending a lot of money on refurbishment during lockdown, and I definitely fall into that category myself. I've done quite a few bits and pieces of refurbishment over the last year or so. But of course, now we've got another thread on Property Tribes talking about how prices are going through the roof for building materials, and there's a shortage. So it seems that just, there's a lot of different things coming into play that are partly caused by COVID, some partly caused by Brexit, it might be a struggle to get the materials you need to undertake the work. So it's not all plain sailing ever being a landlord or property investor, is it?
No, it's not. And I think, we mustn't forget about the Green Homes Grant as well, because I think that would have, before its untimely death at the end of March, would have contributed to, making landlords more aware of some of the grant schemes that were available to be able to help with perhaps not refurbishment in that sense, but certainly upgrading to make properties more energy efficient. And yeah, I like you, Vanessa, will be looking at the places I've got and thinking, what do I need to do with them? My challenge, interestingly, is that my tenants are so long term. They've been in there for so long that, and I think we spoke about this on a previous edition of this, that the churn is obviously a good trigger point to be able to look and think, oh yeah, it's really aged, I need to do that avocado bathroom or whatever. Whereas if you do have a long-term tenant, then you need to think about your program of works, I guess, over the course of however long they're going to be there. And I've got a couple of tenants that have been with me now for 10, 11 years, and it's embarrassing. I've done I was going to say naff all, but very, very little during that, and they must be at least due for redecoration. So yes, put it on my to-do list.
Okay, I'm just mindful of the time because actually we've overrun a little bit in our enthusiasm to talk about all these different topics. We did have a couple of others that we were going to cover, such as the so-called fabled southern landlord heading up north. The media would have you believe that there's literally swarms of southern landlords going up north and buying up cheap properties up north. Just a quick word on that, Ben. I don't believe that's the case. I think there is interest in northern properties, but I don't think it's droves and droves of people looking. If you buy a £40,000 house somewhere up north, it's going to have the similar running costs to a £400,000 house down south. So you do need to take into account these cheap properties. The yields on paper look great, but in reality they may come with issues, shall we say. So quick word on that.
Yeah, you're right on that. And I was going to say, I like you, I'm a bit vanilla on these things, sticking with what and looking on Rightmove, seeing a property for whatever you see it for up north is an interesting approach to life. But I'd much rather know my market, know my agents, know my contractors, know the area that I'm investing in, rather than follow a perceived false economy that a low acquisition price could generate. But each to their own.
Yes, indeed. And very often if there is a herd of people doing something, very often it can be quite a good idea to do the exact opposite. So yes, it's all, again, it boils down to due diligence, doesn't it, Ben? There used to be, or there still is, the famous program location. In my book, it's actually due diligence due diligence. Due diligence.
What a mouthful.
Okay, we were going to talk about my 6 biggest property mistakes. We don't have time, but you can view that on Property Tribes. I just shared 6 of my biggest mistakes, and actually, interestingly, Ben, one of them was that I bought all new build between 2004 2006. That means they've all come up for refurbishment, redecoration, and new boilers, all at roughly the same time. So in the last 2 years, I've just had this endless stream of new boilers, new washing machines, redecoration, new carpets, etc., etc. So do learn from my mistakes, and you know, let other people's hindsight be your foresight. That is the whole premise behind Property Tribes, because there's so many pitfalls out there. There are risks, as we've been talking about. So both the NRLA and Property Tribes want to encourage everybody to become experts in research and due diligence. Use the resources available to you at Property Tribes, all the forums, at the NRLA forums, the helpline, all the educational courses, all there to help you have a safe and stress-free and profitable landlord life. So I think we need to jump to the questions very quickly. Can I invite Stacey on? She's got a couple of questions for us, I think, or if anybody has anything specific they want, please feel free to drop it in the chat. But we'll just be going for another 5 minutes or so. Hello.
Hi. So the first question is, so landlords have faced a lot of regulatory changes during the pandemic. Do you think they should be making their tenants aware of these changes?
That's a good question.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It is an interesting question. If I was going to be evicting somebody, I don't know that I would be letting them know about the stay on repossessions, but they've probably seen that in the media anyway. I think what we've seen during the pandemic is a response to emergency situation, and I think, you know, we are very keen to see them lift and move back to what they were. There can be no doubt, though, that the housing white paper that was announced in the Queen's speech will complicate our lives going forwards. You know, it will be a more heavily regulated sector. We know that there will be landlord redress schemes, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. We know that Section 21 will go, and that's why the NRLA are very keen to shape its replacement, because we know that there's no such fault as a no-fault eviction. There is invariably a reason behind it, and things like Section 8 need to be beefed up to be more reflective of you know, some of the things that Section 21 masks. I say there's no harm in sharing some of those things with your tenant if you have that sort of relationship with them.
Yeah, I think it does depend on your relationship with your tenant. If you are in constant communication with them, whether you're letting via an agent, you may not have very much contact with them. I personally don't feel particularly inclined to discuss that with them. They may pick up things in the media that perhaps gives them the wrong understanding of something. I think it would be good to correct them if they did. But otherwise, you know, tenants generally like to get on with their lives. They have a right to quiet enjoyment at their property, and I don't necessarily think they want to be chewing the cud about landlord legislation. They've got other things to be getting on with, I'm sure.
Indeed. Can we have another question, Stacey?
Yeah, so the next one is, how do you see the 95% loan to value mortgages being made available to first-time buyers affecting the young professionals rental market?
Yeah, I think that is an interesting question. I think it's an interesting move. It reinforces the government's view that they want to get more people on the housing ladder. Yeah, having looked at some of the reactions, I don't know. I don't think it's going to take huge numbers away from a landlord audience, because I think actually at the moment, you know, we have a rent debt crisis. We have lots of tenants that are struggling to pay their rent, and I think tenant groups will be the first to say that that's all fine and noble, but people are struggling to pay their rents as it is, let alone moving on to mortgages. So I'm slightly more ambivalent about that, really. I don't think it's going to be a massive dent, certainly not for the next year at least, as people are more in recovery mode, I guess. Vanessa?
I would agree. I think we are going to see an era of far greater tenant mobility in the coming months. People are making decisions about their lives, sometimes quite big decisions about their lives following lockdown. It's caused a lot of people to reevaluate their lives, what they want from life. A lot of people thinking that health and well-being is more important, wanting to move to the coast. All sorts of mini trends like that developing, and buying a property, and certainly when you're a first-time buyer, it is a major commitment, and I think that the vast majority of people will be sitting, still waiting to see how everything is going to pan out following the easing of restrictions, even though there's still talk that further lockdowns could be brought in, heaven forbid, but still very uncertain times. And when there is uncertainty, people do not like to make very big decisions, and actually that could impact on landlords acquiring properties or new landlords coming to the sector because of this uncertainty. So a lot to play out yet, I think, as to how the economy is going to perform in the long term, and all the other issues that have been pent up during lockdown. They are going to start coming out of the woodwork, as we've discussed before, haven't we, Ben? And there are more to come, I think. So very uncertain times ahead. We do have the sun shining. We do have a very active market, but there's an undercurrent of uncertainty and maybe dark clouds on the horizon. Nobody knows.
Indeed, that's gloomy. Stacey, take one last question, please.
Okay.
Make
so
it a
we've
good
got
one.
There's a lot to pick from here. So we've got one about repossessions. Do you think they would increase over the next few years, or can you see it going at a steady rate?
Yeah, so I think on the repossession front, lots of people have spoken about a tsunami of evictions or an avalanche of repossessions. That's not going to happen. The court service simply cannot cope with that. So, for me, it will be like a really long queue at the deli counter. You take your ticket, but if someone's ordering, 25 different types of ham ahead of you, you're going to be there for a long time, but you will be dealt with eventually. So I don't think we will see an avalanche of evictions, but we will probably see a fairly consistent churn, I would say, as courts play catch up. But the one thing I'm always keen to get across on these things is as investors, as landlords that want to do the right thing, that for us will always be a matter of last resort. And I would heartily recommend use of conciliation and mediation services before you even get into serving of notices, to see whether issues can be worked through, because there's no doubt things are going to take a while. Things are only just reopening up, and there is 14 months worth of cases to be dealt with. That said, what we have seen is landlords wanting to work with their tenants and not default to the nuclear option, and I absolutely applaud that. That's the right thing to do. Not in every circumstance, I appreciate, but generally, why does a landlord doesn't evict a good tenant? They evict a tenant because they're not paying, or because there's antisocial behaviour. If those things can be worked through, then hopefully we won't need to evict. So mediating and conciliating your way out is the way to go. Vanessa, have you got any thing to add, and maybe some closing comments?
No, not really. I think it's interesting times as restrictions start to be eased. There's the feel good factor, obviously the lovely weather we're having, great to see the high streets bustling again. You know, it's just we're still in uncharted waters, and I think once again that and we always say this, Ben, but we shouldn't ever tire of saying it. It is going to be the educated, informed and engaged landlord that finds their way through this and survives and prospers. You know, that's why I think collaborations such as we're doing for the Landlord Lens and other collaborations that you're doing, we've started one with Paragon Bank called the monthly market report, which is done by a local surveyor. So each month we choose a different town and we dig really deep up to a granular level on what's going on in that town or city. The first one we did was Norwich, which was very interesting and very valuable insight shared. So I think one of the great things that has come out of COVID is the use of Zoom, and these kind of educational resources, they are set to continue, and that's a very positive thing, I think.
Yep, I agree. And, you know, looking out for quality quality news and information through Property Tribes, the NRLA and others is, you know, there's a lot of info out there. You need to make sure it's the right sort of stuff, and you can be sure with the NRLA and Property Tribes that it absolutely is.
Hear, hear. Okay, well, thank you to everybody for joining us on the June edition of the Landlord Lens. We do hope you have enjoyed it, and Ben and I will be back. Not sure when the next one is, Ben.
6th of July.
6th of July. Well done. So hope you will join us in there. But in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your afternoon and enjoy the beautiful summer sunshine. We'll see you in July.
Farewell, folks. All the best.